let me just start off by saying welcome everyone to our May sessions. And on a sad note, this is our last time with Kent and Pam Martins talking about, oh man, we've talked about all kinds of things during the last couple of sessions, from glowing rectangles to just having conflict to like children and parenting and what that looks like. And so tonight, I guess probably the most appropriate way to say this is sort of a little bit of a bonus session in the sense that we're talking about marriage, and then sort of like you're sort of using the metaphor of a greenhouse. How can we sort of create the best sort of greenhouses for our family tonight? So I'm just gonna turn it over to you guys and let you, just take it away and tell us what's up here. So
awesome. Thanks, Scott. Really appreciate you hosting, and looking forward to continuing on the series. We kind of call it a bonus session, I guess, because we want to talk about parenting, but we also just wanted to make sure that we took some time to talk about marriage, but we also recognize that not every parent is married, so we didn't want to make people feel awkward that way. But so this is a thing for those that are married or thinking about marriage, just some enrichment principles to make your marriage stronger. So looking forward to that. Yeah. And I wanted to say too, before we get too far, a big thanks to Kirsten Hildebrand and Caitlin Thiessen last week, talking about technology and the presentation they did. So really appreciate them kind of leading the charge on that.
They did a really good job, actually. It was actually really fun chatting with them, and they were like passing the baton back and forth, and they had everything all rehearsed. It was pretty awesome.
No, they'd done the material well before, and I knew they could do a good job, so I really appreciate them taking care of that.
I should probably say real quick, just for those who are joining us out there, while we do these sessions, you're always able to use the Q&A function. And so at the end, if there's any questions that come through, then we'll sort of tackle those at the end time. And if you're wondering how that works, just sort of, if you're on your phone there, if you just tap the screen, a little bubble will pop up and it'll say Q&A, and you can ask a question, and you can ask it anonymously as well. So you don't have to worry about if it's, a question that you don't want everyone to know it's you asking. Or you can just use our chat function as well. And either way, we'll try to get some questions out there or some conversation happening. So take it away, guys.
All right. Thanks a lot, Scott. Really appreciate you hosting all month, and all the work that you and Kyle and the rest of the team have been doing to host these and make these available. And they're all available on the website, because there's a link right on there. You can kind of see the past sessions, and we do recommend you checking those out. So hopefully that'll be something you can do. So I don't know how much experience you have with greenhouses, but we're going to talk. The main metaphor, I guess, about marriage tonight is going to be a greenhouse. And I guess the main kind of the question, I guess we'll try to answer, give some feedback, would be, what can you do to make a marriage greenhouse? And of course, it's not a literal greenhouse, but it's just sort of what can you do to kind of make this kind of the same kind of thing. So, I don't know, Pam, why don't you tell us a little bit about some of your experiences with plants? We have a couple of plants behind us that we had put up in our coffee area just to kind of show that we're serious about this plant metaphor. We want to get into this. So what are some of your ideas about plants?
Well, these plants are Kelsey's, just to be clear.
Right on.
I think I've always been a bit of a green thumb wannabe. And my grandma was good with plants, and my mother was good with plants. And somehow it skipped a generation, and Kelsey's really great with plants, but my track record isn't so good, but I still keep trying. So when Kent and I were fairly newly married, I think maybe in our second year of marriage, I wanted to have some plants in the apartment. And so we went to a place called Zeller's, which was then like a Walmart. And we went in, and I picked a plant that I really liked. And as we were walking to checkout, Kent leans into the plant and says, "You're going to your death."
Okay, so so not my best husbanding moment there. Sometimes a sense of humor gets away on me, and that was a little cheap. So
it wasn't cheap; it was true.
But I would like to apologize again in front of everyone that was not the best idea there.
But it was what do you call it? It was prophetic, because it did die.
Yeah,
I don't even know how long it lasted.
I wouldn't have had to make a joke about it. Like, let's be honest, that wouldn't have had to happen. So
so I still try to grow flowers and plants in my yard, and now my daughter loves doing plants, and so now that I don't have any more indoor plants, now I'm able to kill some of Kelsey's plants. So I left hers out in the freezing on the outside one day on the deck. She brought them in. And I thought, oh, these should be outside. So I took them outside. And of course, that night they froze. And I killed some of her plants. So it wasn't enough just to kill my own. But anyway, my track record is not very good with plants.
And I've learned not to make jokes about that. So a little note to the husbands out there. It's okay to not make jokes every time. So yeah, and I guess for me with experience with plants, I didn't really grow up actually doing too much gardening and whatnot, except that my dad loved gardening. So we got out there and kind of hoed and raked and helped carry dirt and get manure worked in there. So I learned some of the principles, and I have great memories of picking raspberries and even like picking beans. Like the first few minutes when it doesn't feel like work, it's kind of fun to fill up the pail, and then it becomes a bit of a grind. Weeding is probably one of my least favorite things. But I just also remember the admiration I had for my dad, who he had these old rotor tillers, and they're, he'd be shaking along and kind of the ground flying up. I just thought that was very cool. Like as a young boy, I remember that. And the other thing about plants I remember too is my grandpa Reuben in Regina, he had gladiolas. It's a kind of flower. It's kind of this long stalk of a plant with flowers that would come out in beautiful color arrangements, and he'd have hundreds of these plants in this area. And so yeah, I remember watching that. And then we'd always have to take care of them. I'd take them in and kind of keep them clean and dry and cool in the basement. And so I just remember that he had them all labeled carefully. So there's just a lot of care that he put into it. And actually my dad, Peter, who's out at Cairnport, is actually taking care of some of these plants now too. And he kind of watches over them. So
Are some of them still from Grandpa Reuben?
Yep, I think so. I think there's still some of the original.
Interesting, those bulbs.
Yeah, so very interesting. Yeah, we mentioned Kelsey, our daughter. Last year, our son Kyle got married, and Kyle and Alex, for their wedding, Kelsey, I think this word's called propagate, like where you kind of spread them out and kind of grow smaller versions of this plant, and they're called succulents. Very cool. And so she made, I think, about 100 of them in these little pots and had them all ready. So we still have a bunch of them around the house, and that's kind of cool. So anyway, so the gardening world, what is a greenhouse? That's kind of the metaphor we're talking about. I'm going to try this share screen thing. And I just had some pictures of actually one of my coworkers, Matilda. She and her family have a greenhouse. And this is what it looks like inside, which I think is really cool. You can see this is probably from a few weeks ago, but they had all their plants started indoors, and it's kind of perfect conditions. The plastic is translucent, so it lets in the light and kind of makes this optimal growing section. You can see the tomatoes already starting there, and just some beautiful plants. And this is kind of what it looks like on the outside. So just a kind of a frame covered with this plastic, and they even have a cool door. So anyway, so this is kind of the image we want to keep in mind while we are talking tonight about marriage. And we can just say that marriage is it's a wonderful thing, but it also is really challenging and has a lot of parts to it that are worth discussing and thinking about. And so there's just a few connections here that we'd like to make as far as what a greenhouse is like to marriage. So, but before we get into marriage particularly, just to kind of set the groundwork or talk a little bit more to give a framework for this greenhouse analogy, I just wrote down a few things I want to share about what a greenhouse is like. So one thing that's true about a greenhouse is that it's intentional. Like you build it on purpose. Like you don't, it's kind of something that you do because you know that there's sensitive plants that need something, and you think and you plan and you make an investment for money, and you pick a spot, you get a good plan, and then you do something on purpose. It's not an accidental thing. It's something that you value. You realize that it's something that you want. And what the greenhouse actually does is it creates an environment. It doesn't make the plants grow 100%. It doesn't do everything. It's not like a magic thing that happens. It's just it's a setting. It makes a context or a way or an area for these things to happen. And so I think that's kind of interesting. So so some of the examples of what you can control or what you can be intentional about for growth would be like temperature, for example. You can kind of it helps have it warm enough. There's a humidity that's kind of able to be maintained. It allows sunlight, so it's designed for that to have the things that it needs for growth. You'd have all your tools and things there, fertilizer, everything would be all handy, right what you need so that growth is most likely. And the other big thing about a greenhouse is the mindset of protection. It protects the plants from frost and from wind, from critters. We were talking with some of our friends. They pre-planted with seeds. Instead of buying from the nursery, they bought seeds and they put in little things, and they're growing them in the garage, putting them out carefully when it's warm, bringing them in, and they had them outside. Then they said that actually rabbits would get their plants. So they put them up high somewhere, but they have to kind of watch out so the rabbits don't just nibble them all down. And a greenhouse actually provides this protection. So I think that's a cool part of the analogy as well. The second thing I would say also is that it still requires tending. It's kind of this diligent part. So what would you say, Pam, about that, about the diligence that's needed for, even if it's in a greenhouse, what kind of things do you have to do to make sure the plant's okay?
I think you can't just set everything up one time and then have it on autopilot and then leave. And then hope when you return in 2 months that they've all just flourished. So I think the idea of that is just that there has to be ongoing watchfulness so that all of the things that you can control are still in place. And then sometimes things have to be adjusted. I'm assuming, I've never worked in a greenhouse, but then you have the capability of adjusting as you see different things growing in different ways. So I think it's just the idea that you still have to pay attention to it and be diligent to it. You can't just lock the door and hope for the best.
Yeah, no, that's good. And I just think of kind of the hard work of gardening or even greenhouse work, that it doesn't always feel like, sometimes it's great and you go, look at that tomato's perfect, let's take it and this will be delicious, look at all the harvest. But other times it's actually the hard work, oh, well, something really showing yet, or this is, but no, we're going to keep doing the right things and it's taking weeds out, that's hard to pull the wrong thing or those things out.
Or blight or pests.
Yep, right, just kind of watching for health, right? So, and then the cool thing with the greenhouse is that health does, or growth results, or health is part of the result. So I think that's a really great thing. So it's just one of those ideas that there's this intentional part, it requires tending, and then it's an environment where growth can happen. So yeah, that's our big idea, is that marriage is a greenhouse, and the question, I guess, is how can you enrich or grow your marriage to create the right environment where growth is most likely. So we just wrote down a few things and we'd like to share them with you. And if you want to ask questions and things about kind of your experiences, questions isn't even the most thing, because we're not really experts on, or counselors will admit that, but we are interested in hearing from you if there's things that you have found helpful, like patterns that you would advise other people to participate in, as far as things that make your relationship protected and safe and growing. I think that would be a good thing to hear from you if you're interested, if you have comments especially, or things to add, or tips or whatever. So I guess I would say the first thing would be that your partner is like a plant. So if I was a plant, what kind of plant would you say I would be?
You didn't tell me you're going to
ask that question. And I don't want to answer for you, because we could both be in trouble.
Cactus came to mind, but you're really not that prickly.
See, this could be really bad right off the bat. So
you're really like a tiger lily.
Oh, tiger lily,
yeah,
yes. Okay, and you're a delicate white orchid of beauty,
Oh.
rarity. Yes. Okay. So sappiness over. We kind of dodged that bullet, because that could have been really bad with all the different, like a praying mantis, whatever. Okay. So the idea is your partner being a plant, and I guess what we'd say, when you buy a plant at the nursery, which I haven't done a ton of, you've done more of this, you can learn the characteristics of the plant. Maybe you should talk a little bit more about that. Like when you look at a plant, what's on the little tag? Like there's often like a little description. Tell us what's on there, like usually, what types of things are.
Well, it usually shows what sort of sunshine it will thrive with. So if it needs full sun or part sun, or if it needs shade, it can't handle full sun. It'll often say that it likes moist soil or it likes drier soil. It'll say how tall you expect it to grow if you treat it properly, and how wide it'll go if you also treat it properly. So it just gives a few of the characteristics that the plant's potential is listed on the tag, if you manage and follow the instructions of the care.
Yeah, so I guess as it relates to your partner, one of the great things about marriage enrichment, or making your relationship stronger, we would say this to anybody, would be discussing and learning and being curious about your partner's qualities, what they're like, having conversations about their experiences, their perspective on things, try to understand them and just sort of see what their different, what's interesting about them and what the different factors are. It's really exciting. When Pam and I actually were first dating, I just remember we actually used to call each other twin, because the things that we had found out about each other in that little series of we weren't dating, I don't think. It was more of a friendship thing at first. We were just like, wow, you think the same as that? Oh, wow, we are like identical. We just thought, man, we were so alike, and that was just so neat. Well, as we've gotten to know each other, we started dating and something. Man, we are really different. And as we got married, we're like, oh my goodness, like the little tag would be like this long, expansive list, right? As we learn more about each other, and we realized we are not a photocopy of each other. And so that's been a long period of time where we just realized, man, we have lots of differences. And one of the great things I would say tonight would be a great principle, even if you just stop right now and had to leave, would be, how can I be curious about the qualities and interests and beliefs and preferences and desires of my partner? And what are they actually like? And how can I describe them? And then if you go to a greenhouse locally here and one of the seasoned veterans of the greenhouse, you say, hey, what about this plant? They can just tell you a whole bunch of things and how to take care of it and what the best things to do and not do. And you should be that kind of expert for your spouse, that you'd be interested in them and attuned to them and want to find out about them. And so, yeah, then yeah, part of it's learning how to take care of them. Is there anything else you want to say about that idea?
I think the other thing with that idea is that as you get to know your partner, it's not like you can get an exhaustive list, within the first year of marriage, and then that stays static for the rest of the time. I think you have to remember that that list actually is fluid and it keeps changing.
It's true.
As you go through different obstacles, different seasons, that list ends up changing. And I think even just as a person, I think from what I look back to how I was when I was in Bible school to how I am now, I'm quite different. So I think for your spouse for you each to understand that even though you think you know the person fully, when different things come up or different ages, different seasons, that those characteristics shift and there's some fine tuning that happens or things that sort of surprise you that you didn't really think would happen. So I think it's important to remember that it's not like, okay, now I've nailed this, I've got this down, I know this person, we're good to go. There's change and adjustment, and it's important to stay interested through the various obstacles and seasons that you face.
Yeah, I agree with you, Pam. And I feel like just as time passes, there'll be little sections where you realize, it's kind of cliche to say you took them for granted, but it's kind of like that. It's almost like, oh yeah, I know that, I know. And anyone that has kids, you've heard your kids say, oh yeah, I know, mom, I know dad, I know. Well, no, actually you don't know everything. It's okay just to kind of once in a while go, hey, I've always thought that this is true. Is that still true for you? Or do you like this? I noticed you did this a little bit more. Is that kind of how you feel now? Or like, I think curiosity is,
it's a good word.
I'd like to be better at that, actually.
Yeah, I would too, actually.
So yeah, we learned a lot from the seminar. So that's what we're going to do. So I would encourage that as a thing. Just we're not going to recommend any certain one, but we also had talked about this idea of personality inventories. So this is not where I would start to say, oh, this is all the keys to a healthy relationship. That's just one thing that in this area of understanding each other, which would be kind of a big principle, is if you can do some sort of personality inventory or discussion, even if you don't complete it, but if you kind of talk about it or you've heard something about one simple one that we could refer to you to would be, I don't even know what it's called. I think the Smalleys put it together, and the 4 different kind of qualities actually are 4 animals. And so the first, and it's based on the DISC profile, if you're familiar with that. You might have done that at work or something, there might be, or a school. But so the first animal is a lion. So these are the qualities of kind of leadership, decisiveness, competition, energy, kind of that kind of solving things and fixing things. And then the second animal is an otter, and that's more the socializer, kind of chirping away and going from person to person, really extroverted and loving, getting energy from being with people and visiting. The third animal is a golden retriever. This is the quality of steadiness or reliability or loyalty or keeping things all the same and status quo. And then the last animal is an otter. Sorry, I said otter. It's a beaver. It's actually the idea of kind of taking care of details and kind of focused on that kind of organization. Not so much kind of the opposite side of the people spectrum, but really good with tasks and details and planning and thinking ahead, but not on the lion side where it'd be more of an outward focused kind of leadership. So you don't have to be one exact animal or whatever, but I think that'd be a great conversation of those 4. There's the lion, the otter, the golden retriever, or the beaver, and then to be able to think, not to label the person and say, oh yeah, you're totally this, think about yourself and how would you describe yourself, and then interact with your spouse and talk about that together. So what would you say about for us with the animal one, if you were to describe how we would fall into that?
Well, I'm definitely more lion and beaver, and you are definitely more otter and golden retriever. So you're definitely more social and very, very loyal, and I'm a bit more bossy and
more insightful leadership.
Insightful, yes. Let's go with that. So yeah, that's kind of, I think, where we land on that one.
Yeah, so it's interesting too. I'll just say a little bit with that too, because sometimes your personality, how you're wired, actually can help you as you talk together as a couple about roles and what you actually do. And we're kind of the opinion or the experience about kind of discussing the roles that need to get done around the house. And I'd say the principle would be serving one another in love, but there's definitely a giftedness that one of us or the other would maybe do more of one or the other thing for, so it's okay to, as it comes to duties or kind of how you split up kind of things around the home, that you can, you can decide to talk together about those things. So anyway, we just thought we'd mention that. The other one that we've talked about lately, or this winter, we read one book on the Enneagram, and it's kind of this numbering system, kind of 1 through 9. And we actually had a really good talk with our kids fairly recently. Like, our kids are all adults now, but they weren't, I don't know if they're all around, but most of them, I think they're around, most of them. And we read through these different descriptions, and then we all were kind of helping each other understand a little bit more about each other. So just like plants, people actually have unique qualities and traits. And if you ignore that, I think it'll be a detriment to your marriage. So that's not a threat or whatever. It would just be more like, so wow, that's a tip that you could say, well, that would be a good thing to think about. So again, these are not necessarily marriage-related inventories. I'm sure there's things out there like that. We actually do one for premarital counseling called Prepare Enrich. And if you want to look that up on the internet, prepareenrich.ca, there is actually an inventory that a couple can each do their own inventory, and you get a report from that. And it's meant to be done with a counselor, but that's something that there are those kinds of things out there if you're interested in doing more with a personality thing. So again, just to sum up that part, I guess we're saying that being curious about your partner is important. So the next thing I guess I would bring up would be this area of honoring. And if I were to say something to a couple that would be a principle that would be helpful, I think, would be to develop this practice or habit of regularly reminding yourself to honor your partner. And it's a Bible word that I think is very powerful, the idea of attaching a high value to someone. And actually, the verse I'm going to read is actually written to every Christian. So if you're a follower of Jesus, this is something that the Bible instructs people to do. And if you're not a follower of Jesus, that's okay. Like, this is a principle I think you'll understand. It just means to attach a value to someone or something that's high. And the Bible would teach that every person is made in the image of God, and so therefore is extremely valuable. And so when I think of Pam, I think of her in a lofty, high way. I want to keep elevating her in my mind, so that as I consider her, I think of her in this higher way. And the way that the Bible says it in Romans chapter 12, verse 10. Well, verse 9 says, "Love must be sincere, hate what is evil, cling to what is good." And then it says, "Be devoted to one another in brotherly love, honor one another above yourselves." So it goes on and says more of these practical instructions, but I love those two words. One is devoted, or devote yourself to one another. And it kind of speaks of commitment. And by commitment, I mean just that willingness to make a strong decision that's not really based on my feelings or how it's going that day. Those do affect us. I'm not saying they're not affecting us, but you say, I'm going to be devoted to this person. And that speaks of commitment. And the honoring one another, it says honor one another above yourselves. And so this is the idea of mutual submission. Like, we're both partners. If they're both honoring the other person, man, that's a beautiful environment as far as this greenhouse idea that you have this condition of high respect, high value. You care about how the other person's doing. You're attentive to their needs. You're not selfish. You're able to kind of say, how are you doing, and what can I do for you? So again, this is not easy to do, but it's something that I think is really important, the idea of attaching a high value by honoring your partner. So I would recommend that to everybody or anyone, and I would recommend it to myself as well, to think about honoring. So Pam, how does that word strike you, the idea of honoring or devoted, either one, if you want to pick up on any of those words?
I think it's just really hard. I think that I think we're selfish by nature, and I think we just, our default is to take care of ourselves and to make sure that we're good. And to think about your day, you have to be really intentional about thinking, who could I help or who could I do something for? And then especially, how can I make this day better for Ken? What do you always say?
I don't know, how can I make your day better?
Yeah,
I don't always say that.
Well,
because we can't even remember what it is, so we must not say it all the time.
Ken's just way better at this than I am, because he'll sometimes say to me, Pam, how can I make your day better? And that line doesn't cross my mind to ask him how I can make his day better. So for me, it's probably, it's definitely a thing that I really have to keep working on and be intentional about, thinking about how I can honor him with the things that I do within a day. And even decisions that I make about myself and how I treat others, how I treat our kids, how I carry myself at work, wherever I'm involved, that it is sort of honoring the other person, that the other person will be proud of you and how you manage yourself. But I think it is just hard because we are by default quite selfish beings. So to honor your spouse especially, I think that I think it's hard, but I think it's obviously from scripture. It's a very important, and I really like the phrase that you use, and you use it a lot actually, is attaching a high value. And I think when you do attach a high value to something, you are more invested, you are more interested, you do want to take better care of it. And I think it is very important, but it is very hard.
Right. And I guess the other thing I would say along with honor is there's a kind of willingness to be flexible, and flexibility is a hard thing. I'm probably, like, physically, I'm very inflexible. Like, if I ever go to a chiropractor or a physio, they're like, "Can you just do this?" I'm like, "That is, I'm doing that as far as I can." No, seriously, like, straighten it up. That's it. That's all I got. So it's like, being rigid or kind of stuck in your own way, that blocks actually honoring, because then you're so used to having it your way, and it's a battle. I'll admit, and when you're tired or feeling a little bit, we'll talk about that in a minute, but man, when you're not at 100%, it is really tough to honor. So anyway, but I think you like it if I say, how can I make your day better?
Oh, it's awesome.
Because I remember I've done it sometimes, then you've actually said, you thought about it just for a second, and then there's actually just a task. And if I take care of that, it only takes me a few minutes. But then I know that I've actually helped her, and it's been something that she maybe even wouldn't have asked, but when I asked you, then you say, yeah, and then it really kind of, I don't know, makes me feel good when I can do that. So that's cool. We want to talk a little bit about hardiness zones. Okay, we have that on our notes here. Maybe we're taking this a bit too far with this whole metaphor of greenhouse. I think not. I think it's perfect. So tell us, Pam, what is a hardiness zone as far as when it comes to plants? Then we'll try to figure out how this relates to marriage somehow.
Well, I think it was cool when we looked up a map with the hardiness zones. You can see the different shades, different zone colors, and then how they kind of come across North America or Canada, and how within each zone, how certain plants thrive in that particular zone. And the zone is, I guess it's based on geography, the weather, and the soil conditions. So I think when we were talking about this, it was the idea that you want your marriage to be in the toughest hardiness zone, because things do come in along the path. They come into your life, and you have to figure out how to still thrive when it can still be, the environment can still be really hard around you. And I think it's hard. I think 5 is the hardest one. It's the way up north.
Okay.
When it's super cold and the ground is probably frozen for most of the year, and how to have that kind of a relationship where, and the characteristic, I guess, of your marriage, so that even though the hardest situations would come along your path, that you would be able to withstand that, and that your marriage relationship would have enough to survive through whatever the environment is that happens around you.
Right on. Yeah, and I just wrote down here that marriages will have time when thriving is more difficult. And so, like, sometimes the greenhouse feels great, and it's just like, man, it just feels like there's lots of resources, the love is flowing, it's easy to get along. Everything seems really clear. The romance is there. You know, the kind of little soundtrack in the back is perfect. All the people are beautiful. You know, no cavities at the checkup. It, you know, just goes great. And the bank account's fine. Car's working good. The fridge kind of cools everything off. I'm just saying there's lots of circumstances that come up in marriage that actually do test kind of the hardiness of the relationship. And you can expect that if you're newer married, you can expect there will be difficulties. And in premarital counseling, one of the questions on this survey that we do, or this inventory, kind of asks, like, you know, I believe that there'll be tough times in our relationship. And some people are like, well, no, I think it'll be fine. Like, we'll never really be tested in our marriage. And I think anyone who's been married for any length of time, actually, you'd realize, man, there's some really tough things. And we know people who've gone through really, really challenging things. I think we would look back and say we've had it really good, actually. There's been some tough times where we've had difficulties, but I don't know. I guess we would just say that just to be aware of that, and don't be surprised if there's difficulties in your relationship, but don't take that as a sign, oh, we're not compatible, or don't, we're going to end this, or this is over. No, it's just a challenge, and it's something that you can, I don't want to oversimplify it, but I guess it is something that just, if you know it could happen, when it happens, you're not like shocked or blown away that this is a difficulty, or yeah. And the other one of the questions that comes to mind in that survey that I think comes up sometimes is, nothing could ever make me question my love for my partner. And then I think when you're engaged, you think, oh yeah, I agree, nothing would ever, but actually there are things that people do in marriage that actually make you question, does this person's, or do I love them, or do they love me? And again, it's just a nod to the seriousness of it, and that hardiness is something that you can develop by attention and care and building up your relationship. So,
and I think that's, I'm just going to pop.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
I think that is the idea of the greenhouse is that the greenhouse is a place of protection, and within that greenhouse, you manage the variables. So you within the greenhouse decide what that environment's going to look like. So whatever's happening outside of the greenhouse, as awful, as terrible as it could be, you know that within the marriage, we still make the decisions about how this is going to go. And so that should never be out of our control. So that how we relate and how we manage and function and interact and communicate are still decisions that we make to decide if we're going to thrive or not in our marriage, regardless of what's happening all around us.
But boy, if it's not going good, it is tough.
It is hard, absolutely.
Okay, so the other thing I had written down along this area, I guess, with difficulties, is the idea of work and family and childcare and money. Like, there's lots of these factors that come into life. We're kind of come through. We're at almost 3 months, maybe 2.5 months through adjusting through this COVID. Like, when this is being recorded, you might be watching it later and like, oh yeah, COVID, that's a distant memory. But right now, it's a big factor, and it could be that your marriage is struggling. You might be having difficulty, or you personally might be having stress or anxiety or worries, or feeling lonely or disconnected, or not able to touch or feel connected. And I just want to acknowledge that is a reality, and it's okay just to keep talking about that. And I would say, if you are married and feeling that way, just admit it. Like, get alone sometime. And sometimes we've had to get the person's attention. Hey, can we have some time to talk? Pardon me. Talk later on, and kind of set a time, because we just want to be able to talk things out. And one specific area that we would just want to make a mention of, as far as this hardiness thing, would be just this idea of saying, the idea of not sacrificing our marriage relationship in pursuit of the relationship with our kids. So if you are married and happen to have kids, just that be just a reminder to you to keep building up your own relationship. I just saw a text, actually. Someone was going to go on a date without their kids. I thought, man, that's perfect. I think it's good to do that. We don't regret doing that. That's a little bit of veering into parenting, so I know it might not affect everybody, but if you are married and have kids around, it's really good to kind of, it's good for the kids to see that too, that mom and dad's relationship is important. So you probably have heard that principle before, but I just want to encourage you with that as well. The next topic we have is conflict. I guess I don't know exactly how that relates to a greenhouse, other than I guess that it kind of controls the environment or the risk factor, rather than being out in the middle of the wind. We're recording this on a Wednesday. It's very windy. I see the trees just outside, they're just blowing like crazy. And sometimes relationships feel that way, that there's lots of conflict. there will be conflict definitely in married life. And Pam, what would you say about some things about conflict that would be good for us to remember?
I think the two things that come to mind are, and I don't know if we're going to talk about this more later, but just the idea that that you both want the same end result, like the outcome, whatever the conflict is and whatever toughness there is in the relationship. Ideally, you want the end result to be that you'll be stronger in your relationship and even more committed. And so if you both have that in mind, that that's the end result, I think then you can communicate, you can try to stay soft, humble, and open to being confronted on something, or I don't know, what else would you say? I guess that's the idea of being soft and having the soil. I think Kent's preached on this too with the different soil types. Having the soil that where you can grow, and that's a choice. You choose to have that kind of a soil. So when there's conflict, we tend to want to preserve ourselves, and then we tend to get tight. And I think in the tightness, we build walls. We get a little fist. We just want to protect ourselves in the conflict, rather than maybe expose ourselves to maybe some pain, some difficulty. But it is actually through that exposure that you can learn how to trust, that you both really do want the same end result. Mm-hmm. And when one partner doesn't want that, the conflict becomes very, very difficult. Mm-hmm. And we are big proponents of counseling, of getting other help, whether it's getting another couple involved, whether it's going for counseling. If you're finding that conflict, you're not figuring it out, get help, get someone to talk to somebody that you respect, and that, even if it's another couple that's older than you, that you could draw in and explain your situation. And I think the other thing with conflict is to somehow separate yourself from it. So if you can look at the problem and sort of set it on the table, and then come onto the same side of the table and look at the problem, like somehow separate the issue or the conflict from yourselves emotionally, and then together try to team up on the problem and come up with a solution that will address the conflict or the problem that you're facing.
Right on. Yeah, and I think that's maybe what we found the best when we're kind of feeling anxious about something, or there is a conflict between us. And I'll just say too, like I sometimes duck conflict, and so some people look for conflict and kind of want to talk to things and bat it out. Other people kind of dodge it. So you probably know right now, as soon as I said that, which one of those two you lean toward. So if you are a dodger like me, sometimes you have to kind of bring it up and say, okay, look, this is not going to be an easy conversation, but we should really talk about this. And I think even back to when we were dating or earlier married, driving facing the same direction, or going for a walk facing the same direction, or like we're sitting right now, and I mean, if this piece of paper is the problem, like this is what Pam was saying, this is the problem right here, not this. Like this is okay. We don't see eye to eye on this, but we're gonna look together at this and figure this out. I think that's a great kind of posture for conflict. Yeah. And we would say that the strength of communication can actually help you with all of these things, especially conflict, is just being able to talk and be aware of your own feelings, to be able to talk about what's going on, to recognize when the emotions are coming high. Pam's been really good at this too. I'll just say she thinks of things very quickly, what she thinks and believes in a conversation or conflict. And I'm way slower to think about what I really think about things, or I'm in the moment and I don't always have the snappy comeback, or can't say what my thoughts are right away. So we've kind of learned that we have to kind of respect each other's differences and even how we're wired. So sometimes we pick it up later, or we've had this thing where we've had this talk and I've kind of been quiet and it bugs Pam, so she goes on to something else to talk about. And later on I'll go, I still think we should do this and this and this. Like a day or two. Like, yeah, it's almost
he's talking about something. I'm like, what are we even talking about? And he's been processing and mulling and
so my computer needs a RAM upgrade or something. It just does not function fast enough to keep up. So just realize that there's differences. And actually conflict can be really good. You don't have to say that conflict is terrible. And the other factor, I'll just say, your family of origin will really affect how you think about conflicts.
Sure.
Lots of areas in marriage, but this is one of the big ones, is fighting okay or not? And how do you fight? And how do you get to a resolution? And what do you do? How does that make everyone feel? Or I don't know, so it's a good thing to think about the whole conflict thing.
Let me just day that when you have a spouse who's a pastor and you're in conflict and you're having an argument or a fight, as it were, it always feels like we are fighting, but God's always on his side. That's how it feels. So it feels like I can't win those ones.
You can't. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah. So yeah, there's lots of being able to work together on a problem and have conflict and work through it, and not attacking each other, but working on the problem.
Yeah.
Another thing we just wanted to talk about was the idea of self-care or spouse care. Mostly managing yourself. Just this idea of being able to understand what you need as a person and how to talk about getting that doesn't tip over into selfishness. So this is kind of a trick because you have to be a healthy version of yourself. And that's very popular in the literature today. And I know it can go down a selfish road very quickly. Like if it's all about you and your health and living your best life and being great. I mean, that's awesome. But you have to have that where there's an awareness of what you kind of need to keep growing as a person, or to have some time by yourself, or kind of some energizing activities that are good for you. We've also found that we need to have friends that are outside of our marriage, that sometimes we just need to have someone else to talk to or hang out with or do some things. It's great to have some couple friends, like all those are great, but there's sort of this, just a word about self-care and taking care of yourself and monitoring your own condition for the sake of your marriage, that you'd actually be able to take care of yourself so that you're a great partner for your partner. That makes sense. So, so I don't know, do you have any thoughts with that?
Yeah, I think it just, I think one way to gauge the choices that you make, self-care versus selfishness, I think if the activity or the thing that you really want to be involved in somehow energizes and refreshes the marriage, then I think it's self-care, because then I agree, it helps you become the best version of yourself. But if you find that the thing that you're drawn to and you're starting to invest time and energy into is somehow robbing from that relationship, from the marriage, then it tips into selfishness. So you want to take care of yourself to enrich and to make this healthier. But as soon as something that you're involved in starts to pull out of that relationship or pull you away from it, then it tips into selfishness. And I think that's where you want to gauge the choices that you make just in your daily life and things that you want to have put energy and investments into.
Yeah, I would say that's true. And sometimes you can tell if your partner needs some time. You can just say, hey, why don't you go and have coffee with your friend? Or why don't you have a nap? Or why don't you, what can I do why don't I make supper and then you can take it easy for a bit? So that might just sound like serving the other person or trying to honor them, which, we talked about earlier, which it is that, but you can also help each other be healthy. There was one day this week I came home from work and it was supper time, but I just felt exhausted. And so I just had a nap. Like I just literally slept for like an hour or hour and a half and just hard sleep. And I woke up and then I felt great. Like it just actually was really something that I needed. So that's like a little example. I used to play hockey and sometimes it'd be late at night. So then you would come home and be sweaty and tired. And then I know when our kids were little, there was one night particularly I was upset because Pam was crying and the baby was crying and my hockey game time was on, so I was crying. No, so but I kind of left. I kind of felt bad later. I was like, man, I don't know. It's just a point of discussion that it's good to have some time where you can kind of take care of yourself and to be healthy, whether it's physical exercise, whether it's socialize, whether it's spiritual disciplines, taking time, whether it's just something like sleep or that sort of thing. So yeah, just be able to talk about that as a couple and make sure you're being honest and when it tips into more of a selfish zone, because then I think resentment can happen and you can start drifting apart, and you want to find some activities that you can do together and enjoy together. So maybe that's a bit of a separate topic. But anything else you want to say about the self-care thing?
I don't know. I guess this is a bit of a tangent, but when I've gone through my darkest depression, I'm very inward focused and I'm very curled up into myself. And those times are very, very difficult for Kent because at that time, I feel like I'm just managing. So he's not getting anything out of me in the relationship. And he has had to persevere through some very dark times of feeling lonely. And well, you should maybe say how you feel, but I know that when I am at my darkest, that it is very hard on our relationship, because I tend to isolate and I pull away. And so I think in that relationship, we've been talking again about how there's that tension of trying to understand your spouse's mental health and to be the best encourager, best support, best partner you can be when the other one is going through that. But at what point do you try to help them move out of it and to take next steps? And the last bout that I had, we actually had someone outside of us come and sort of just actually confronted Kent and said, you know what, actually you're enabling her to just stay in that bad spot. And it was hurtful at the time, and we both were like, why would they say that? But it was true. And I think it's always hard when you're dealing with mental health to know when to just walk alongside and then when to actually walk a little bit ahead and try to draw somebody forward. And I think that's a completely another issue, and it's another huge issue to discuss. But I know with just briefly on our struggle with my mental health, that has been some tension that we've faced.
Yeah. I didn't know you were going to say all that, but thanks for sharing. No, it's sure. I appreciate you sharing that. And I guess, and I would just, as you're saying that, I would say that we would sympathize with someone who's, if someone's going through a difficulty, it's tough for that person what they're going through, but the spouse supporting that person with an illness or unemployment or some other thing that happens, or loss or grief, or just sort of, whatever it is that person's going through, it's tough on both people in different ways, and it's okay to kind of acknowledge that and get support. And it is hard to know where it tips into selfishness or kind of self-perpetuating in a negative zone. So I guess we just wanted to raise that as a topic, and you'll have to keep talking about that. Yeah. So I think we talked about that a little bit already. This idea of what negligence chokes out life. That sounds so dramatic. That sounds like...
It's really good though. I like it.
Negligence chokes out life. So just the garden patch of your marriage will become weed infested and sad if you don't take attention to that. Yeah. I would say that we would, like, well, how would you put it, like the opposite and more positive? Like, how would you pay attention to the relationship? Like, is it kind of, we have to make a date night and go out, or what helps us feel more connected again, where we maybe haven't really paid attention to each other for a while?
I think that's different for every couple. I think that's an important communication point, is for you to decide, when have we felt the most encouraged or the most engaged with each other. And I think that that looks different for everybody. Like, we like to read to each other. Like, well, when we're driving or whatever, we'll read a book together. Or we don't golf very much anymore.
We had seasons, though, a few years where we golfed.
We love to golf together and love to travel together. So I think it's important to figure out what those things are for you as a couple. And I think it can just be such a variety of things. It doesn't have to look a certain way. But I think it's very important to together decide what things you can be involved in together that energizes and is tending to the relationship.
Yeah. Well, I think that's good. Having some common interests, doing some things together. And we would, like we said before, getting away together has been big. We've always looked forward to that. I don't know how you guys are if you're married. It's nice to have something that you're looking forward to. And this COVID season has kind of taken away from some of that. I know some people I've talked to, they have been already out camping now this month of May sometime. You're looking forward to that. You book a site, when those opened, or there's something we always look forward to going to Red Rock where we had some time away, or sometimes people have been generous and lend us a cabin or whatever. Then you look forward to the next thing where you can be together as a couple or as a family and look forward to those things that are enriching and fun to do. Yeah. It doesn't have to be expensive. No. And it doesn't have to be like a formal date. No. Like, we've had lots of fun where we just sort of watch a show together and just spend some time.
Yeah.
Or read, like you said. So we're gonna wrap this part up pretty soon. Just have a couple more kind of last little comments, and then we'll see if there's any comments that you have. Maybe you guys have some advice. This would be a great chance for, maybe a last chance, I'll say, to type in something that you would say would be a piece of advice or something you found helpful to build a greenhouse for your marriage, where you would be an enrichment thing. We also just, Pam and I started out when we were, I guess, engaged. Did we get counseled to hold hands when we prayed? or did we just start doing
No,
that?
David
Yeah.
Adelin.
Yeah, we had a couple that was my professor at Bible College. Or do you have classes? We both had classes with them. So they just said how they recommended holding hands. So actually, we have this thing
When we pray.
when we pray. So not all the time, but we'll hold hands.
All the time.
Yeah, just never stop holding hands. Driving. So, but it's funny because sometimes we'll be in a room and we'll be separated, and then we can tell that there's going to be a race or someone's going to pray. So then we start kind of moving toward each other and find. Or if the kids are between us when they're little, we used to reach across and just kind of hold hands and touch each other's back or whatever. Just, I don't know. I guess it's just that connecting point of just saying, this is important to both of us, our spiritual life, and kind of like, I love you, and this is important to me. And so I know faith sometimes is viewed as a private thing, or it might feel kind of weird, or people don't like public shows of affection. But like just to reach out and hold hands to pray, and I'd say we're not 100%, but pretty close. Like we really try hard if we're together and someone's praying or we're praying together, we try to hold hands. So we would recommend that to you as well. And praying together at night. Just a quick story about that. When I was kind of a younger pastor, just earlier in our marriage, I guess. I've been a pastor most of our married life, all of our married life. So, we would pray sometimes at night, or sometimes at night I would pray and then Pam wouldn't pray. And so
That was a lot of time.
Yeah. So why don't you say more about that? Or do you want to talk? Or should I say that quick story?
I don't know what it was exactly, but I did feel like a little bit of it was my own silent rebellion, or it was just a little bit of a fist inside where I didn't want to pray at night. I didn't want to pray with him. I don't know exactly what it was, but there was a barrier for me. And I held on to that for quite a long time. And it wasn't until we were it was a marriage enrichment weekend, I think, at our church.
Actually, it was it was in town, but not at our church.
It was a different church,
yeah,
right?
That's right. It was very early when we first came here.
Yeah, and it was
early 2000s.
It was with Stephen Jackie Masterson,
right?
And they challenged couples to pray together at nighttime, and how important it was to make that connection at the end of the day. And so at that point, I chose to soften up, and I sort of relinquished that, whatever that was holding me back, that fist, or that, I don't know what it was. Some sort of barrier that was keeping me from just softening up to him before sleep. And I think that's where we started that, where we still aren't very consistent, but
no, but
we do it way more than we used to.
And it feels, I'll say to guys, like if you're not a praying out loud kind of guy, even if you just say a couple sentences, it's something amazing for your wife to hear you admit you need God's help.
Yeah. And
just to say, you know what, God, please help us have a great day. Help us to be wise with our parenting, or help us to be, help us to figure out this financial challenge, or help me to work this problem. Amen. And even help us have a good sleep. Just a short prayer, and see where it goes from there. And I'll just say to wives, speaking as a husband, man, when Pam prays with me, it's like crazy good. So it's just really encouraging, and she doesn't have to go long and pray, but just that I know that she's admitting she needs help from God, and that we need help together. Yeah, it's really great. So yeah,
I guess it's sort of the posture. It's the health posture, the open posture that we've been talking about.
Yeah,
I think that's what it does. Sort of at the end of the day, is admitting that we do need God's help, and we do want the whole thing between us to go well.
Yeah. Yep. So I'm sure other couples do like lots of different kinds of devotionals, or there's lots of great things that people pray. We're not saying that we got this all cornered or figured out, but boy, the little bit of even just praying at night really makes a difference. I would also just say, as we conclude, just being honest and getting help, as Pam mentioned before, and just that there's not really, it shouldn't be a stigma with counseling. I know Tom Peters was on here earlier, and you can listen to his session, and he actually goes through in one of these May sessions just the benefits of counseling and how counseling can help your spiritual growth. And I think it's good for people to, if you'd like to just have a conversation with someone about marriage, to go together as a couple and just to be able to talk things through. A counselor could be helpful, or even just informal coaching, if you could find someone that you could talk to. And just Pam mentioned Steve and Jackie. We earlier when we were here in our relationship or our marriage here, and our kids were young, we actually had probably was 1 year or winter, almost a whole year, where every 2 weeks they'd come to our house, and maybe some other kids were in school, but we'd have like tea or whatever, and just sit and talk about marriage and about balancing marriage and ministry. And for me, that was a big thing, just getting someone to talk to and hearing their experiences and what they had worked on. And so I I'd encourage you, if you'd like to get some sort of someone to go alongside with you, and just be open to getting some advice just from other couples that you look up to or respect, and just take the initiative to contact them and say, hey, like, can we talk sometime? So yeah, so I'd encourage you to talk about that and be open about your relationship and see if you can grow, because that is helpful. The other thing would be is, if you're a reader, there's lots of great books out there. We're not going to recommend a ton of books, but there are so many good books about marriage. And it used to be in school, you had to read from front to back, or that's how you'd always think about it. Or a novel, you read kind of the whole thing. With these kind of books that are helpful, get it from I would recommend a Christian point of view, or not, but just a Christian book would be great, probably, some sort of Bible backing, and just some principles of communication or marriage, or some area that you'd like to grow in your relationship. And then just read the parts that you want to read. You can kind of graze it, and if you find it interesting and helpful, then share it with each other. And so we've read a few books that way. So that's something that you could consider as well. So I think that's the end of our time. We have more we could talk about, but we want to keep it about there. So Scott comes back on just in the nick of time.
Hey.
So yeah, thanks Scott, for hosting us and kind of watching over us in the background. So appreciate
Absolutely.
it.
Yeah, no worries.
I would like to pray at the end, whenever we're going to, just before we sign off.
Yeah.
I'm just praying for marriages in general, and if whoever's still listening or watches this later on, just to know that we're praying for them. So
yeah,
just
for
before
sure.
we sign off, I'll do that.
There's and I'm just looking at the questions here. I think you've actually covered quite a few of these questions. There was another question about I was always told that conflict with your spouse was normal, but that it also matters how you have conflict. So the question was, any thoughts on how to have conflict well? What could that look like practically? So maybe you touched on this already, but I don't know if there's anything more you'd want to add to this.
Well, I can just give a couple quick things, and then Pam can jump into. I would say, I think when you have an ongoing thing, it's good to actually, this sounds weird, but to make an appointment with each other about when you're going to talk about it, and almost put it in your calendar. Okay, 8 p.m., tomorrow night, let's have a conversation about it. It's not like me in the parking lot, we're going to figure this out. No, it's more like, let's just pour a cup of coffee. Let's sit down and get some paper out and talk this out. Then I think it's really good to sit on the same side of the table. It sounds minor, but I would encourage you to sit on the same side of the table, so you have that posture of, let's look at this together. I think it's good to talk about what the problem is, define it, like just say kind of what we're doing, and don't just hear the other person and just describe what the issue is. It's good to review what you've done in the past without accusing. So don't blame, or, well, you always did that. Just talk about what you've tried to do and try to clarify what's been happened in the past, and try to get to if you could define what kind of the issue is or the problem, that can be helpful. Mm-hmm. And then if each person can own part of it and realize that this is what I'd like to do to help, and this is what the other person, if you both kind of think about not and saying, well, you have to do this, don't focus on the other person, kind of own your own part of what you could see as far as a possible solution. And then it also is good to set a date or a time for it. Like, when's this gonna, like, if we're going to try something different for this week, let's do this and this, and then agree on what the time frame, and then kind of agree to talk about it again. So it's kind of a no say, in my opinion, like, not that it wouldn't be yelling or name calling or blaming. As those kind of things come up, you'll have to just kind of find a way to, that might be a sign you need someone else to help coach you, just to kind of talk through what the issues are. So so it would be more of a problem-solving approach rather than trying to win an argument or out-volume the other person, or calling names and things like that, or accusing. It isn't very productive. So that would be my comments. I don't know if you have anything to add.
I think there's two things come to mind. Very much what you've already said, but somehow separating yourself from the emotion. I think when we're high emotion, I don't know that we really think super clear. So if you can somehow, I think the idea of setting a time gives you time to separate yourself from the emotion around the conflict, so that when you're actually talking about it, it's somewhat objectified. It's separated from you somewhat. Even if it's intensely emotional, if you can somehow separate yourself from it long enough to actually talk about the problem. And something we did was kind of weird. We kind of did the third party thing. Was I'd ask Kent, like, how's it going with Pam? And it was a weird dynamic, but it actually separated us somehow in such a way that he could just be honest about how he was feeling or what he was thinking about the situation.
Mhm.
So I think objectifying or separating yourself emotionally, I think during probably our worst season of conflict was in Weyburn. And because of our personalities, we ended up polarizing quite severely. And Kent was so convinced that his thoughts, his ways of handling a certain situation were right, that he kept trying to convince me. And I was so convinced that my way was really the best way, that I tried to I kept fighting for what I felt was right. So in that tug of war, we kept pulling even further and further apart,
Right.
because we were so convinced that our way was the right way to handle it. So in that time of conflict for us, we learned that our strengths and weaknesses are virtually opposite. And so if we can somehow learn to tap into each other's strengths and help each other with our weaknesses, that we actually come together and make a better decision, and we handle it better if we realize that everything that we can bring to it, it actually makes for a fuller resolution to whatever the problem is.
That's good. I like that. Another question here. So the divorce rates are very high amongst Christians, statistically speaking. How do couples sort of keep love alive in a marriage long term?
Yeah, and I guess, ready to go?
Yeah.
Okay.
I get very passionate about this subject because we're seeing friends of ours who are separating, and it's been hard to watch. And I think we've had a lot of conversations about it, and I'm sure that each one of those scenarios has their own unique set of issues and problems. But somehow we set patterns in our decision making and in our life. And I feel like when we start to set patterns, that they become very deep ruts. It's very hard sometimes to come out of those places and come back together. And when you both have ruts that are running alongside, and I think in our case it would be with parenting, where families have become so involved in their kids that they're living side by side, and they're not interacting through the whole situation. And so I think as time goes on, as small decisions are made, that the deepness of the ruts or the separation I think it can happen slowly. I think we've talked a lot about this with premarital counseling with kids. Like, you guys, no one goes into marriage thinking they're going to get a divorce. Like, you go into marriage anticipating that we're going to stick it out. But that comes with a lot of little decisions, and that comes with patterns that you develop. And when you start to catch yourself in a pattern that you know is a little bit sideways, the sooner you can reel that in, the better chance you have of building healthier patterns. So I guess the principle in all of that is to just keep regular checkups, so that as soon as you realize that some of the things you're getting drawn off, that somehow you can reel it back in. And I think the other thing we're seeing is that often once the patterns get pretty deep, it's often one person that has pretty much closed themselves off in the relationship, and the other person really wants it to work. And then as this person gets frustrated and stonewalled in the relationship, they start to close up. And as this person realizes that the situation they've caused, or the difficulty that's been created, they become soft, but then the other person is done. So somewhere in there, both hands have to be open, and there has to be a willingness on both parties' part to want to thrive and to make this work, and to go to the counseling, to do whatever it takes to bring that back together.
Maybe just a little one step further into this question, Kent. I know you've mentioned this over the years that, and I say this because I know that you've done your fair share of marriage counseling with people who are in the crisis time, where they're in the struggle or they're in the separation phase. What's some of the things that, and I know you've mentioned that that it saddens you because it seems like at that point is when they reach out for help. What are some of the things that you feel like couples could do, or that you wish that they would do before they're in the hot water, that would sort of help them stay out of the hot water and help them to mitigate against that process?
Yeah, I'll say, Scott, all the things we've said tonight in this last hour actually are from that place. Just
Yeah.
to say, these are some principles of just sort of thinking of yourself as it's something worth investing in and being intentional about, and that your relationship health doesn't get better by default. You actually have to work at it.
Yeah.
And again, this sounds judgy. Like, I don't mean to judge anybody who's going through a tough time. I know that there's lots of difficulties and circumstances that we're not always aware of everything that happens. I guess it would just be that if you have humility that it might happen to you, that you could, some people think, well, nothing would ever cause us problems, or we would never have issues or challenges. I think even just because it makes it sound like your commitment isn't very good, but actually, if you're a little bit scared that you could go the wrong direction, that actually is a reminder to say, okay, no, actually my commitment is something. If you're so firm that you're never going to have trouble, you actually could have trouble. So it's almost that, I feel like you almost have a bit of nervousness that, there, but for the grace of God, that could be me if we aren't careful. Like, when you think of something, so just, I would say, if you have a marriage relationship that you're in, it's worth urgently protecting it and developing it and saying, this is important, and what can we do to make sure we stay together and on track, and be quick to apologize and own your part of it, and don't look for the other person to fix it. Or it's not like 50-50, it's actually 100-100, like where you both kind of really give her, like, as far as your commitment, and that you don't see a plan B, you really want to be together. And I think those are all kind of almost obvious things, I guess, or whatever, but I think the heart behind what we've said tonight are just some practical things you can say to stay on the same page, and to see yourself as united, and to be a couple. And the principle from Genesis chapter 1 is biblical oneness, that the husband and wife are joined together and they become one flesh, and they become one. And it says that they were naked and didn't have any shame. There's sort of that, I'm totally open and clear and transparent and working with my partner, and I want to be together with them. And I don't know. Yeah, I wish there was an easy fix to say this would prevent it for sure, other than just saying that being aware of it, not being scared or paranoid, but also just having that humble caution that this is so important, we have to protect it. I don't want to take this for granted. I guess those would be the mindsets that would be maybe helpful.
Yep, fair enough. My last question here, and again, I think it's something that you've touched on a little bit, so this could just be something that you want to expound on, but what do you think is important for couples that are preparing for marriage? So I'm guessing, where should their focus be? Where should their priorities be? What should they be focusing on?
Well, I guess I would just say that the preparation time for marriage is very exciting. And actually, after this session, I'm going to do a premarital counseling session with a couple. It'll be really exciting to talk to them. As I mentioned, I often do this prepare enrich. It's an inventory that both couples fill out separately. And the way it helps is that it identifies some areas that maybe the couple hasn't talked about too much. So I think one of the biggest things about premarital counseling is just having lots of conversations, that it doesn't have to be with a counselor, but that there be prompts that the counselor might give you to have conversations. And actually, most couples in the dating stage are getting ready for marriage. They actually think they've talked about everything. Like, oh man, there's nothing we have not talked about. So even just have a bit of humility as a young couple, or maybe not even a young couple, but a premarital couple, whatever age you are, that you would have humility to say, man, there is lots I could learn. And it is about curiosity. And I would also say that it would be a high view of marriage, that you would go into it saying, this is something that's, I want to make a commitment or a covenant commitment to, and that you wouldn't take it lightly. So those are important, kind of the seriousness of it. Mm-hmm. And I think it's also just as fun just to talk about the things that are the same and different. I think family of origin is worth talking about a little bit. I think spiritual beliefs are really important to talk about. I think sometimes people assume that they have the same spiritual beliefs. And then after they're married, they're like, oh, you want to go to church every week? You want to go to services? You want our kids to become Christians? Oh, really? Like, those differences actually can become really big. So it's just important to kind of have as many conversations as you can as you prepare. And Yeah, and I think also the other thing is the family and friends support is pretty big. Just to be able to not rush into marriage if your family and friends have kind of warning lights. They don't have to be the deciding for you, but if they do have concerns, to be wise, a wise couple would take some time to talk that through and kind of explore those issues and maybe talk to your parents a bit more, kind of slow down the process a bit. Yeah, and I would say also just to premarital, I would advise reading or watching some DVDs. We often recommend things to young couples, and some couples actually read and discuss things, and reading books together can be really helpful just to kind of get those ideas surfaced so you know kind of what you're getting into. So I think having a high value on marriage, and then also being as kind of having your eyes open as much as you can about the other person's beliefs and values and opinions, and that you've had lots of conversation skills and advice about how to work things through is kind of some things I think of.
I think you covered it really well. I think one thing that comes to mind is just through the whole thing of marriage is to leave your ego at the door. Like ego has just no place in marriage and in close relationships. And I think that's often where the fist comes from, is from self-protection, or that, raising yourself higher than you should. And so I think even just with young couples, one of the things we really try to encourage is when they have some sort of conflict, to learn how to talk through that. And then one person, exactly what you said earlier, I love that. It's not about who can win. It's about together solving whatever that conflict is. So I really like that idea of it's not about winning and losing in the relationship. It's about how do you describe it? The resolution.
Well, resolution. Sometimes this sounds kind of businessy, but it's almost like idea debate, like without kind of feeling you have to win. It's kind of what will be the best solution, and then being, kind of having it open-handed, I guess, about it.
Kind of what we said.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know if that's helpful, Scott. But.
I think so. I think it's awesome. Well, I'm going to leave it at that. And I'm just going to turn it over to you in just a moment, Kent, for you to pray and to take us home here. But I just wanted to quickly mention to all of our attendees who are out there, that if you happen to miss any of our past sessions, whether it be with Kent and Pam or any of our other presenters for May sessions, you can check those out on our YouTube channel. So if you go to YouTube, just search for Emmanuel EFC and you'll see our logo, our name, you'll see a bunch of other videos, and in a channel that's specifically made with all of the May sessions inside of them as well. So Kent, I'll turn it over to you to pray and to leave us out of here.
Yeah, and I guess I would say just one last thing is, if you are married and you have you had people that you picked in your wedding party to stand up with you, and if you had some people standing up with you and you're having a little bit of concern or question, I would encourage you to reach out to one of those people. Even though it's been many years, you might not be the best friends anymore, they'll remember how they felt at your wedding and that you trusted them to be there to witness that. And I think I would love to see way more of that, like where people would go back if they're having trouble and talk to their old friends. Say, hey, you were at my wedding, can you help me out? My marriage is struggling, or I need to talk to someone about how I can grow. So that's just another thought I had. Just if you did have people stand up for you in your wedding, that maybe that'd be someone who could be a friend to you. So let me pray for us as we go up. Father, I just want to thank you for your love and care for us. We just want to start by thanking you for being a great God and loving us. I thank you for the gift of marriage. I thank you that that this is something that you endorse and you've created for our benefit, for our pleasure, for kids to come through it. If you so bless, I know some families can't have kids, or there's some people that would love to be married that aren't, or there's marriages that are maybe struggling or have broken apart. And we just acknowledge the pain from that. And I just ask you to give us healing and encouragement. For those that are in marriages right now, I would just pray that you would give us a willingness to really talk about our marriage, that we'd be willing to grow and enrich it. And I do pray that you would help us to think about how we can make a greenhouse of health so that our marriages can flourish. And so I do pray for marriages in our country, in our community, and our church family, that you would strengthen us as we relate to each other as partners. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much, guys. And to everyone else there, have a great evening.
And I just want to say one more thing. Scott and your team, thank you so much again for all your work. People are going to watch these later, and I just want to get it on record again, saying we appreciate all the work that you and the discipleship team have done to arrange all these tracks and have this content available for the days to come. And if you watch this, just encourage other people about the May sessions that they can watch them online. So thanks, Scott. I appreciate it.
Cool. Thanks, Kent.
Okay.
See you guys.
Yeah,
See
bye.
ya.